Our next session is a fireside chat with one of the most prolific women business leaders in the region, Bhavna Buttan. Please welcome Bhavna Buttan. Bhavna is a Chief Operating Officer of the Gulf Marketing Group. She both designs and implements key business systems that promote GMG's vision and with deep knowledge of the business. Bhavna has immensely contributed to GMG's expansion and profitability in key sectors. Please, another round of applause for Bhavna. Thank you. We have a lot of energy now. So to moderate this session, I would like to invite once again Ravi Rahman, the publisher, the keynote speaker at Martech Vibe. Please welcome on stage.
Wow,
and welcome
what a session
back,
to
Ravi.
follow.
And over to you.
Thank you so much, Aziza. Guys, we need to keep that energy level. I don't have drums. So, Bhavna, you need to stand up and we need to make it really interactive and almost drum up things. So, first question to you. Despite the pressing needs, retail transformation hasn't happened fast enough for a lot of brands. Tell me why.
Well, I hope, yeah, the mic is working, yes?
It is.
I feel like we should have come on with a jig to like work off some of that energy.
Should we call for some drums? Can we have 2 drums here, please? Go on.
Thank you. I think we've been very blessed with, we're lucky to have a government like the UAE, which has done so much for the retail sector over the last 15 years. They've made such large investments in infrastructure and created, great mall development culture. I think, and obviously a stellar tourism economy. What's ended up happening is retail companies, I think, have followed that lead and had a great growth mindset, which is to go after expansion and new formats and new stores. That's what everybody's done. What this did, unfortunately, lead to was also not the same amount of speed put into building the infrastructure that is required to kind of support that growth mindset. And of course, what's happened is an unprecedented consumer shift because of the pandemic. And now what, by default, everybody's kind of started focusing on moving into the digital journey. And that leaves the age-old problem of demand and supply,
True.
which is there aren't enough tech partners, there isn't enough human capital to actually support not just the needs of what the companies need today, but also to future-proof an ecosystem for the, to make sure that the customer journey is actually forever evolving because it is moving.
True, very true. I mean,
so unfortunately, that's been
so would you
alive.
say that the physical transformation happened faster than the digital transformation?
Absolutely.
How many of you agree? All right. So according to reports, obviously CMOs and COOs need to work very closely. And we have a room full of CMOs. And they're wondering why you're here. That's the whole reason is for us to, or for you to tell us, how is that relationship shaping up? Do you see a lot more collaboration than before? How do you see that evolving?
So I think the most important relationship that we should be cognizant of is that between a brand and a customer. So it really doesn't matter whether you're a CMO, a COO, CIO, CFO. I think every single one of the C-suite needs to be focused on the customer experience at the center, as my colleague said earlier on today, and kind of pivot their area of expertise to add value to that, as opposed to kind of looking at it as a siloed approach. Also, you guys seem to be like very keen on dismantling the C-suite today. So I think it's everybody, right? Everybody should be a customer experience officer. And I think it, especially at GMG, we'd like keep evolving as a value that we do have. Data or insights or strategy are not owned by any one silo. It is very much everybody digging in as a family together to ensure we're delivering that central piece of that customer journey.
All right, so I want to bring in another C-suite, which is a CTO. So obviously with this huge technological shift that was happening, the other core component was technology, and CTO or CIO played a big role. Again, how did you bring this whole trifecta of these 3 C-suites working together?
So like I said, I don't think we look at a siloed approach. I think one of the things that we're working on, I think the human capital strategy for the future is very, very different from what we've known it to be before. We're kind of implementing it now. We're actually in the beginning of that strategy, which is to kind of build an agile workforce. And I think agility as a concept is not really, so I think everybody has technical skill sets that can add a lot of value, but it's more in terms of how much width you can take on. So I've come from the brick and mortar side of the business and then the .com side of the business, and then therefore understand the operating model required. So like that, I think almost all of the C-suite we have, which is the CIO or the CTO or the CMO or the CEO, who I also call the CVO as the Chief Visionary Officer, are all aligned on the journey. So it isn't very much, right, how does the CIO do something? I think it's about, like I said, pivoting their area of expertise to that same value.
And you mentioned e-commerce, so obviously you've strengthened your omni-channel platforms a lot. I want to understand, what did you prioritize first? Because it's very easy to just carry it away that, hey guys, we need to go omni-channel, let's change everything, let's bring in the new shiny thing. How do you prioritize?
We bought the new shiny thing last. So the way we, I think, like I said, our CVO, I keep calling him that because that's, I think he's more that than he is the CEO, which is, he had, about 7 years ago, he wanted to revamp our homegrown brand, Sun and Sand Sports, into a digital store. And that's where our journey actually started. We put in a lot of screens, we put in a lot of tech, we bought some of the decision-making elements that today are there on e-commerce catalogs into the physical store. We learned a lot from that journey. So I kind of helped him with that journey. And that kind of exposed all of our infrastructural gaps. At the same time, we had launched our .com, sunandsandsports.com. Again, all of the infrastructural gaps were very, very obvious at that point in time. So that is the reason we started a whole lot earlier. And we were able to turn around and focus our energies on the assets of inventory and customers. And then, of course, it's been a long journey, and it is for most companies a long journey, one that is expected, unfortunately, to be turbocharged now. And the idea is to just, again, like I said, how do you bring your inventory and your customers as close together as possible in a frictionless journey? So for me, it isn't a physical store or a .com, but it's very much the world in the middle.
Interesting. So I want to talk about one thing. Brands and marketers make promises, and the operation fulfills the promises, right? So to a large extent, I think OX, which we are coining here, which is operational excellence, is what powers CX. So how do you see that equation playing out?
Look, I think without doubt, the CMO is definitely the closest to the consumer, right? So they know exactly what they're saying, what their needs are. They know the value assets that we have as a company that they can provide as a proposition to that customer, either get rid of a pain point, for example, or add value in terms of, customer delight in any way. So what ends up happening is I think most companies look at it more like a linear spectrum, which is, okay, the CMO's at the other end, very, very close to the customer, and the entire rest of the C-suite is kind of working towards top and bottom lines and digital capabilities and ecosystems. And I think it's more when you have a cyclical view of it and you put the customer at the center, like everybody else has said as well, but it's more about allowing the CMO's insights to inform direction inwards. And then obviously as a CEO to ensure that based on the value proposition identified, you should be able to turn around and have an agile operating model to bring that to life and to then be able to deliver that promise in consistency, right, to build trust. What I think is interesting though is I'll give you an example. Amazon started same-day delivery ages ago, and then it became kind of a fastest to the finish. Can I bring the 1 day down to 4 days, 4 hours to 2 hours to 30 minutes? Reality of it is only, you've got to kind of know exactly what value lever is important to the customer. So for example, when you're talking about food or medication or utilities, hours, minutes matter. But when you're talking about selling a treadmill, it's a completely different requirement. They want after-sales service, so they want peer reviews and ratings. So it's more about the organization being slightly more razor-sharp in knowing what levers are important, and then obviously having an agile operating model to deliver that so that the promise is truly fulfilled.
All right, so you didn't mention about CMOs giving you insights for you to serve the customer better.
Absolutely.
What kind of tools, or what kind of insights, or what kind of channels are available for you as a company, and what others can learn from to get those insights, get a filtered insight, which is, filtered out of all the fluff?
So I think, obviously the baseline of everything is a good data strategy, right? I think, and value at that core of the data strategy is incredibly important. I think what was mentioned earlier was the more information you have, the easier it is to have analysis paralysis, right? So I think it's incredibly important to first identify. So we 100% have a great data strategy. So everything from infrastructure to cybersecurity, being on cloud, making sure that all of the information that is being collected across all of the data touch points is in a tangible, understandable methodology in your data lake for starters, right? I think then the cycle of, I think when you come from traditional brick and mortar where you don't have too much information available, and most of it is historical, right? All of your data touch points are historical. What happened yesterday? How many customers you had walk into your store, etc. When you take that information, you kind of have preconceived biases on what those levers are that are important. So you kind of put those in first. I think it's important to then kind of reevaluate. You allow the machine learning bits to do the piece that they need to based on your levers that you've put in, but then you pause again and you kind of jig your data strategy based on the insights you're now getting based on machine learning, for example. And then reevaluate, re-put in levers, and that's when you probably put in AI into play to actually let it go. On the other hand, I think almost all companies don't, because we have the siloed approach of marketing and finance, and don't realize how much information is actually available that can cohesively be put into a CDP, for example, to give you insights that can be phenomenal. It can open up new revenue lines, new information, which can be super valuable for an organization. So I think a robust data strategy is number one. And again, value at that core of the data is super critical.
Interesting. Since you mentioned customer data platforms, AI and ML, I want to open this panel for questions from the audience before I ask my next one. Anyone has any questions about how legacy companies have really actually used CDP, AI, ML to derive better insights? Yes, I think we have a lady there. Can we have a mic there? Or if your voice is loud enough, you can just stand up and ask. Save time.
You're going to get me into a lot of trouble in this room.
To be politically correct, without naming names, tell us what are the kind of key factors you look at in selecting a vendor? Not just CDP, I would say other solutions.
I think the team that took about 1.5 years to finalize the product that we're finally going to go to start right back there.
Is that your tech team?
Well, no, actually, that's the customer-facing team. That's the team that actually knows what retention means. So I think, look, there isn't a right answer, and I'm not going to tell you that, you normally in IT, you kind of tend to follow a traditional, when you're looking at an ERP, for example, you have a set number of questions that you can ask, and you can rate every single product against certain parameters. Those don't hold true anymore, right? And like I said, I think, and you're going to hear this a lot today, is what does the customer want? What are the assets you have to monetize and build that relationship between the two, right? And whatever gets you there with intelligence, with least amount of disruption to your overall ecosystem. So it's an 80-20 rule. If it meets 80% of your value proposition for the customer, go for it and then swing the other 20. That's the way I put it for now.
So it's not really try everybody and go to the cheapest, right?
Definitely not.
All right. So I want to ask you the next question, which is about your role. How has your role changed as a COO in the last 2 years? What are the kind of significant new challenges you've taken on? And what have you really actually given away? I want to question that also.
So I think my career obviously started in traditional brick and mortar retail. I did that for Nike Retail here. I did that for Sun & Sun Sports for a good 10 years. And that was a great learning curve for me, right? Which actually helped when, like I said, when the CEO wanted to do a digitally led store, that kind of opened us up to understanding what the consumer wants in a physical space, in a phygital space in the store. And then, of course, taking on e-commerce. So my steepest learning curve was about 3 years ago, learning the world of the .com, right? Because by then, Pure Play had made Amazon has ruined the world in so many ways, and was a fantastic North Star to really look at to say how they've completely changed that customer journey. So I think that's been a fantastic learning curve for me to be able to therefore add value back into my current role, which is the CX, right? Which is to turn around and say, CX and OX, which is to turn around and say, what are the processes, what are the tools, what is the human capital that is required, what is the R&D we need to do. We've transformed, like I said, human capital in the way we think about human capital is very, very different, which I think is very central to what we're trying to do now. Agility is the key word. How can you find fundamental skill sets that can upskill really, really quickly, can go more width, not necessarily always depth, while keeping the depth silos intact of, say, finance or IT, etc. So human capital remains to be my central focus now, because I think that's going to power a lot. Technology on the other side, I've had to learn a lot on that piece as well. And of course, supply chain. If you're in retail and if you're selling product, that is always the biggest challenge almost every consumer company faces. So those are the areas that are my focus now and that I've had to take on a lot more of. What have I given away? I've given away worrying about how much money we made yesterday. I have a fantastic team that does that now.
Okay, so you just outsource the worrying to someone else.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. All right. What are your top 3 predictions for your industry in 2022 and broader retail sector?
So I don't think, I think post-pandemic, I don't think anybody should be making predictions. So I'm definitely not going to call it that. I definitely say for traditional brick and mortar retailers, there is no traditional brick and mortar retail. There is no pureplay.com. It's a phygital world from now on. It's omni-channel. Accept it. Change quickly. Value-driven data is the new currency. It is the new oil. But not just data. Value-driven data, I think, is super critical. And the last one I would say is what's going to be. I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek, whose ethos is to be kind. I think every company, with all of this disruption that's happening in MarTech and consumer shifts, etc., every company has an opportunity to make the world a better place by adopting the kindness, and I think that's definitely going to be a trend going forward.
So we have about 2 minutes. Since you mentioned Simon, obviously Simon talks a lot about the why. Yeah. So what is your why? Why are you in the business?
I think at the core, I think I'm a sponge. I love to learn, and that's what drives me every day. That's
fantastic,
my why.
Fantastic. Guys, we have another minute for questions. If you have any other questions about how not to select CDP or what else to look at. Anything else? That's about it.
Thank you very much.
So no drums, no enthusiasm? So all the sessions have to be with drums. Thank you so much for this session. It was lovely speaking with you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhavna and Ravi, so much.